Hello and welcome back to the Bird's Eye View podcast. We are here on Monday, July 15th. I'm your host, Zach Worden, joined as always by Jori Negin-Shecter. And the MLB Draft, the first two rounds and every round in between has come and gone. Jori, the Toronto Blue Jays made their selection. It was not a player that we talked about last week when we previewed 10 different players that could end up as Toronto Blue Jays. But how are we feeling about Trey Yesavage at 20?
To be fair, yes, right-handed pitcher Trey Yesavage out of East Coast, Carolina. The Blue Jays were not expected to be able to walk away with him. That's why we didn't preview him. He was a guy that many projected as a potential top 10 pick, maybe top 15 if everything went wrong. And there's been whispers around baseball that the Blue Jays have walked away with one of the steals of the first round. He looks very projectable, very polished. He's got a 4-pitch mix, and everybody seems to be very happy about this pick, except for me, but we'll get into that.
I know when the pick comes down and you were kind of like, oh, man, a pitcher. I wanted a hitter, but for me, I think it's they hit a home run with the pick. Honestly, it's the third best pitcher in the draft, and he's closer to the talent levels of the top two guys, Chase Burns and Hagen Smith, who both went in the top 5. So I think a really good pick. I know, if you wanted a college hitter, I think that's fine. But as far as a guy who can have an impact at the major league level, I think he was maybe the safest bet of guys left on the board.
Definitely a pick with, call it, safety in mind. I mean, my guy, so to speak, Seaver King, goes 10th overall, I believe. So he was well off the board. But of course, Ryan Waldschmidt's still around, and he ends up slipping all the way, I think, to either the first pick of the second round or maybe in the comp round, somewhere in that ballpark.
That was so the prospect promotion incentive round.
Yes, there you go. So there were some guys that maybe you wanted that ultimately the Blue Jays ultimately went a different direction. I mean, I think that both of us, we talked before we recorded that I think we were both a little scared that it was going to be a college catcher, which just is not a sexy pick. So I don't think this is worst case scenario by any means. Yesavage, all the kind of talk around him, all the scouting reports describe him very polished, as I mentioned, a guy that is going to accelerate rapidly through the minor leagues. He's not going to, be on the major league roster beginning of next season or anything like that. But I believe it was Keith Law that mentioned he's likely to be a guy in Double-A by the beginning of next year. Who knows if he'll be pitching at all this year, but they talked, even the Blue Jays development coordinator, and they discussed that he had some built-in kind of workload already. So some, nice durability with him. He had a lot of success this year, just in general. So in terms of the pick itself, there's not really much to nitpick. It's just really kind of a preference thing, I would say.
Yeah. I figure he's a top 100 prospect. Like, as soon as, all the prospect outlets do their re-ranks, like I figure he'll probably be in like the 90s, the 80s, like right away. And I mean, like, if you want to talk about the numbers, I mean, in Division I baseball last year, there was 3 pitchers with a 40% strikeout rate or higher: Chase Burns, Hagen Smith, Trey Yesavage. There was 3 pitchers with a K minus, or a strikeout minus walk rate of higher than 30%. Chase Burns, Hagen Smith, Trey Yesavage. So he is firmly in that group. And I mean, he was second in batting average against, I believe, second in WHIP. He had a 2.02 ERA over 93 innings and 15 starts. He posted an 11-1 win-loss record. Second time on this podcast we've referenced wins and losses now. That's 2 podcasts in a row. But yeah, he doesn't walk a lot of hitters. He didn't give up a lot of hits, and he punched out dudes at an elite level. So I think as far as what was on the board at the time, like, it's a really nice pick.
Yeah, I don't think that necessarily it's a whiff by any means. I think just on the principle, I think drafting a pitcher in the first round, it's fine. Like, you can do it. just I think that by the nature of the position, and again, this is a broad generalization too. It just it scares me. It feels like it's just such a risky position to be picking, even as a college guy. And this is not a knock on Yesavage. This is just a philosophy thing. Is I'm so fearful of drafting pitchers in the first round that he had a lot of success. He had a really strong year against really good competition. Not an SEC guy, but I mean, still had success. I think it was he had a head-to-head showdown with I think it was Chase Burns
Yeah.
in the regionals and won that duel. So like he's done it against really good competition. I think it's just for me. I think you got to balance upside versus floor, and you want a guy in the first round that is going to be a contributor in some capacity. It sounds it sounds like he is going to be a contributor. It's just that he's a pitcher, and it's just so hard to know.
Yeah. So, I mean, one thing that you always have to ask in any draft, but specifically baseball, when a situation like this happens where a guy who is firmly projected to potentially be a top 10 pick and perhaps like I think 15 was kind of considered the floor for him in the draft. And you have to ask, why did he fall to 20? Right. And I don't think the collapsed lung really played an impact in that. I mean, obviously, it takes away from some of the numbers and everything like that, but like again, he missed not that much time with the collapsed lung. He missed like their conference tournament and was back for that start against Chase Burns, like you mentioned. So I'm not sure that plays. I think if you look at Keith Law, who mentioned kind of the short arm slot and teams maybe having some concerns there, I guess you can look at that as a reason why he fell. I'm also like interested by how the draft played out because it seemed like everything was fairly going according to plan, other than Braden Montgomery slipping to the Red Sox at 12. And it seemed like Yesavage was almost destined to go to the Red Sox at 12, but Montgomery slipping helped them land him, which is the Red Sox, man. They have been drafting very, very well recently. But
Yeah, that's a nice
anyways,
get for them.
so we talked a little bit about Girangelo Cinche before the draft potentially being a Blue Jay, and he goes 15 to the Mariners, and I felt like that had to be the spot where Savage went because all of the teams between the Mariners and the Jays seemed very set on taking hitters, and a couple of them, or I guess yeah, like two of them went way off the board with the Marlins going PJ Morlando at 16 and the Brewers going Braylon Payne at 17. So, interesting to see those teams reach a little bit. And then I think that just kind of played into Savage's slide. And maybe it is kind of that an arm's lock concern, but I think for a true talent level that it was a little surprising to see him make it that far.
Yeah, by some of the call it biometrics, call it whatever, with maybe his pitchability, his I don't know, makeup, I guess would be the term you could use. You heard a little bit about some teams being scared off by it. I mean, I pull up Antonio Urquidez had kind of a on Twitter. It's at Antonio 0U. He or whatever. He he was posting these kind of spreadsheets, call it, with percentiles. And I mean, you can see his extension was something that, I mean, for a 6'4" guy, this guy does not get down the mound very much. So maybe some like mechanic stuff people didn't really love. By true talent, yeah, like you mentioned it. I mean, he's right in that class there with the very best college pitchers available. So I think a slide all the way to 20 is a pretty substantial surprise.
Yeah, and I mean we can kind of get into like a little bit more specifics with him because like dude has a deep, deep arsenal. And it's I mean fastball, splitter, slider, spike curve, and all of them get swings and misses. All of them he commands well, and it seems like it's pretty rare to get pitchers like that who have the ability to throw that many pitches and not only get whiffs with them, but like throw strikes with them as well. So I think that's that's fairly impressive for him. And I mean, you talk about the release point a little bit, right? Like he's um one of the highest release points that has come out of the draft in a really long time. And there was a piece written by Baseball America like a couple days ago, trying to find pitch comparisons for some of these draft eligible pitchers. And it in there it wrote that the way that he throws his fastball makes it almost like a unicorn pitch because of how he's able to get like that ride on the fastball or the IVB, if you will, from such a high arm angle, right? Because if you're thinking like high arm angle, you're thinking like really, really downward plane. But if he's able to get that from like way up here and get that riding look, because you know sometimes guys have to like drop down that arm angle to be able to like almost push it up. So I think it's a really unique set of circumstances where he is able to do that with the fastball, and I think it'll be an interesting pitch to kind of keep an eye on as he progresses through the minors.
Yeah, I think that the best way to put it is there's a lot of parts, a lot of kind of there's an outline here you can see of almost like a workhorse type. I mean, I think back a couple of days ago, the Blue Jays played the Giants, and it was Chris Bassett versus Logan Webb, and it was two guys that just shoot innings and used a lot of pitches and used deception to get guys out. And that seems like kind of a mold that maybe a Savage kind of can work towards. The Jays have already mentioned, as we said earlier, about already have being comfortable with his workload. He's got a deep arsenal. He's not going to blow you away. I mean, he has some decent velo, but nothing astonishing. You figure he maybe adds a tick or two in pro ball, maybe more, but I mean, I wouldn't necessarily be expecting that. But to me, this seems like a guy that's likely to become an inning munching type. And it's just how good can he be as kind of an inning muncher? Can he be like an elite level inning muncher? Can he be a really good one? I know on the draft floor they tossed out a Michael Wacha comp, and I mean it's not the most exciting comp, but at the time of the draft he flew to the major leagues. Like I think he might have even been in the Cardinals bullpen that postseason. Like he really, really moved through the minor leagues fast. So you would think for Yesavage, you're probably looking at maybe not a year from now, but you're maybe looking at a guy that you can toss out there and gives you, 6 innings every start. It's hard to project. I mean, there's no such thing as a pitching prospect as it is, but that seems like kind of the mold, kind of the blueprint for him having success.
I know Waka isn't like the ideal name that you want to hear. You know, you want to hear, oh, he's I mean, I was gonna say Jacob deGrom, but literally nobody is Jacob deGrom. So you want to hear that he is like a Logan Webb or like a Zach Gallen or like kind of those types that are number ones on their staff. And I think maybe placing a number one expectation on Savage is might be a little bit too much to ask. So, like, if you look at him as Michael Wacha when he debuted, like Wacha through his first, I have it up right here, but through his first 350 innings, he had a 3.2 ERA. Didn't give up a lot of home runs, didn't walk a lot of guys, and the strikeout numbers are a little bit lower than you would like them to be. But I think if you kind of look at it, Savage probably has a little bit more potential as far as strikeouts go than Michael Wacha did as he made his way through the majors. So I think there is definitely the blueprint for like a effective major league starter and just kind of being unique, having such a deep arsenal, and just being like having shown that he can throw a bunch of innings and strike out a bunch of dudes. I think that there's something there, and there's like some expectation or some projections that have him placed as like a number three, but I really do think that like with a little bit of fine tuning and you can debate if you want whether the Jays are the team to get him there, that there's a chance that he could end up being like a really really solid number two starter.
No, for sure. And the other thing also is you think about the Blue Jays and their lack of pitching depth has been such a talking point for this team. And part of it is you can't look at the current draft as it really relates to the current team because, best case scenario, guys take at least a year plus to get to the major leagues. And that's if you rocket through the minor leagues. For a guy like Savage, it's more of a kind of down the line thing. But to have arms that you're comfortable bringing up if injuries do flare up. I mean, you think about the Blue Jays this year, guys like Yario Rodriguez haven't been able to stay healthy. You think about Alek Manoah, he's out for an extended period and then some. You think about, I mean, even other high minors guys, I think of Ricky Tiedemann, who hasn't been able to stay healthy. So to have guys in this pipeline that obviously we've talked so much about the Blue Jays lacking in terms of pitching and being able to bring guys up that you believe in, in a similar capacity almost to the way that they've been able to slot in hitters like, a Spencer Horwitz, like a David Schneider. That's something that Yesavage could potentially bring to the Blue Jays down the line. He's one pitcher. He's not going to make up a whole staff by himself, but it still does set the wheels in motion for that pipeline to eventually come to fruition.
Yeah. It'll be interesting. I mean, they have 19 more picks to make in this draft, and Savage wasn't the only one that they made yesterday. They also drafted right-hander Khal Stephen out of Mississippi State. Um, Kind of a name more like it seems like maybe they perhaps reached a little bit on him, and maybe in a money-saving move that will have them taking some more shots like further down in the draft in the next couple rounds here. But they picked him with the 59th overall selection, and he was ranked by MLB Pipeline at least 88th. So curious your thoughts on Steven, if you really have any takeaways from that pick. I think it's similar to last year's Juwan Watts Brown pick, where it's a college arm, and it's a guy that you can put in and maybe work with and kind of find a way to get him to just move up in the system.
No, for sure. I won't pretend to be the number one Cal Stevenson, knower or anything of that ilk, but all the indications kind of sound like he's another guy that projects as a rotation arm, kind of as a floor, not necessarily a top of the rotation guy, not even, in that Yesavage kind of like 3 or 4 guy, but seems like a guy with a deep enough arsenal that could be a guy that factors into the back of a rotation somewhere down the line. But anything outside of the first round with pitchers, right, you're really kind of taking shots. And with Khal Stephen, as you mentioned, it does seem like potentially a money saving thing. I wonder if maybe they have to go over slot with Yesavage because of the slide. It doesn't seem like that's necessarily going to be the case. I feel like we maybe would have heard more about that if it was. But I would anticipate with Steven, you're kind of looking at maybe a slightly slowed down but similar projection just in terms of it. And it's clearly would to my whatever to my eyes seems like something the Jays are targeting is this pitchable starters with the pipeline, the eventual way to get to the major leagues ideally being somewhat expedited. I think of in years past drafting guys, and this is way back, but I think of drafting guys like Sean Reed Foley, or I think of other guys like CJ Van Eyck, or Irv Carter, drafting these high school guys. And obviously Irv Carter wasn't as high a pick as maybe these other 2 guys, but I think of drafting these high school high upside arms and how long you're kind of waiting on them, and if they get hurt, how much longer you're going to be waiting on them. And by going back to back with college pitchers, I think the idea is that you're looking at guys that are helping maybe 2 years down the line or 3 years down the line instead of maybe 5 or 6 years.
Yeah. Yeah. When I think of Steven, I almost look at the pick and is like, hey, that's like a poor man's Trey Yesavage. Um, where it's like a dude who has a deep arsenal, is able to throw like 4 pitches for strikes, doesn't walk a lot of dudes. I mean, he had the 27.9% K rate, 5.5% walk rate, like a nice Sierra, but obviously not the upside that Savage has, just as far as the velocity goes and the quality of his pitches. He seems like basically just like a pitcher's pitcher. And like if the Blue Jays had Khal Stephen 2 years from now in the system this year, it seems like he would likely have gotten a shot to pitch as like the number 5 starter at this point. Like I think
Yeah,
that's the
yeah, I'd
type of
say,
guy
yeah.
that they're picking, right? Where it's like a Sem Robersa, Adam Kloffenstein type to have some minor league starting pitching depth, and maybe there's a chance he eventually like earns a spot as like a consistent number 4 who eats up some innings and gives you like a high threes ERA over 170 innings in a season, and that's kind of like the peak of what you can expect from that. But I mean, overall, like, I mean, I think it's a nice pick, especially if they're able to save some money and take some shots with the next picks at some higher upside guys.
Yeah, I would expect that, as you've kind of mentioned, that's probably the outlook for him, just in terms of the way that you would hope he's able to get to the big leagues in relatively short order. But I mean, it's all relative with the MLB draft.
Yeah, I mean, he is 21 and like that's a little bit older than Yesavage, right? So he's potentially a guy that you'll want him to push his way through the system and like not take 3 years to make it up, right? Like you'll probably want him as a 23 or a 24-year-old to at least be pushing.
Yeah, exactly that, right? So, I mean, we'll see again. I think it's worth acknowledging again. There's no such thing as a pitching prospect, but I think after the first round, I think you really just you take shots at guys that you like for whatever reason that may be, and the Blue Jays like Khal Stephen.
They sure do, and it'll be fun to see. They have rounds 3 through 10 today, and then rounds 11 through 20 tomorrow. The Jays have a compensation round pick after the fourth round for Matt Chapman signing with the Giants. So we'll see if whoever they pick can live up to those expectations.
We'll
Uh,
see.
bef-
We'll see if we can get a another Edwin Encarnacion to Nate Pearson pipeline going here. I don't know if
yes,
I would necessarily bet on that.
yeah. After the fourth round is a long ways down there. So before we go though, but we talked a little bit about the Canadians who might get drafted before the draft in our draft preview, and two of them did go. Dante Nori goes in the first round to the Phillies. He was ranked around the 50s to the 80s, depending on where you looked. So really exciting that the Phillies kind of jumped and went and got him, despite him being a higher or an older high school prospect. And then Emilian Petrie, he ends up going in the second round to the Rays, the pick before the Jays again, like a higher pick for him than where he's projected. I mean, MLB Pipeline had him in the 170s and he goes 58th. So really exciting for both of those guys to have had profiles that teams wanted to go out and get.
Definitely. And I mean, like Dante Nori, he's older than Arjun Amala, right? As a high schooler. So I don't think he was a guy that some teams heavy on the models, is what I heard, kind of loved necessarily. But again, I think it's exciting to get some CanCon in the first round. It's something that we weren't expecting. So to get two guys drafted on day one that are Canadian, certainly to me is a win in my books.
Yeah, it'll be. I'm sure we're gonna see some more coming up here. It was one thing, as I was kind of doing some research on Savage, you kind of look at like the strikeout rates of the guys like I was talking about with the three of them leading Division I baseball, and we talked about LB Langevin in the draft preview again, but he was fourth in Division I baseball in strikeout rate.
There you go.
So could be a guy to watch here on day two as an early pick, and it should be pretty fun. It should be a good time. There's nothing like diving into dudes who are picked in the ninth round.
I, for one, eagerly await the Blue Jays next. Goodness, I don't even know. Kevin Pillar. I don't think he's even
David
drafted in a round that
Schneider.
exists. David Schneider. He's also around that no longer exists. I don't know. We'll see what
Uh,
happens. We'll see what
yeah,
happens.
it's always fun. That's going to do it for us here today at the Bird's Eye View podcast. Make sure to drop a follow or review wherever you get your pods. You can like and subscribe on YouTube. We're there at the Bird's Eye View podcast. You can follow us all on Twitter. I am at Worden_Zach. Jori is at J Negin-Shecter, and the pod is at BEV_pod. Thanks so much for listening and enjoy the rest of the All-Star break.